All right, we'll say good evening. Let us begin. So we left off. Where did we leave off? We did the fundamental halakhos of Bishmal and Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. I believe we left off at the two dots, right? Or did we do Amud Rava? We didn't do Amud Rava. That's what we're up to. Okay, great. Yes. All right, so Amud Rava. So we'll say. So remember again, we have our fundamental halakhos of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai and Rabbi Yishmael. Namely, again, what should be the relationship between learning and between learning and between working? So remember again, we have this fundamental machlokes. So we have Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai saying that halacha l'maisa, a person should devote themselves to learning, and if a person does so, then HaKadosh Baruch Hu will take care of all their material needs. Rabbi Yishmael is saying not so fast. Haneg bahen minag derech eretz. Right, literally again, live a life of balance. Learn, of course, and learn a lot, but work a lot also. And in Meretz Hashem, provide for yourself. So again, how do we paskin? So the Gemara said, many people tried like Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai and it didn't work, and many people tried like Rabbi Yishmael and it did work. So the Gemara ends off by saying, Amar Rava. So Rava says as follows: Amar Rava l'Rabbanan. Rava said to his students, to the rabbis, B'matusa minaycho, I beg of you, Yomi di Nisan, Yomi di Tishrei, during the days of Nisan, days of Tishrei. So remember again, days of Nisan, right? So Nisan is planting, right? And Tishrei is harvesting. So during the planting season, the harvesting season, Lo tischazu kamai, I don't want to see you in the Beis Medrash. It's not something you hear all too often, right? I don't want to see you in the Beis Medrash. Why not? The Rebbe said it's actually really fascinating. What Rabbi was saying was like this. He said to his students, I would rather you put in the time working at specific times of the year where your efforts will bear fruit. And that way, if you put in your time working, you'll be able to go ahead and focus on your learning the rest of the time. Masha'en kain, if you're not attentive to your work at the time when the work needs to get done, what ends up happening? You end up having to work more and work harder throughout the entire year. So better not to be in the Beis Medrash. And by the way, it's interesting, like the months, right? Can you imagine? Don't be in the Beis Medrash in Tishrei, right? Yamim Noraim. Don't be in the Beis Medrash Nisan, right? Pesach. So like these are pivotal and powerful times of the year. Yet Rava felt better to take care of your parnasa during those months. That way you know your parnasa is secure, your parnasa is guaranteed, and then you can go out throughout the rest of the year knowing that you are materially taken care of. And I will say, it's an interesting yisod in general. Rav Kook, Rav Aaron Yisrael Cohen Kook had a beautiful saying. In English it goes, when you daven, and when you learn, and when you work. Which at first glance sounds pretty simple and straightforward, but it's actually quite profound. He was saying, don't multitask. Whatever you're doing, give it 100%. Because that way, you'll get it done well. The great challenge in life is that often, wherever we are, we're kind of always looking to be somewhere else. So when I'm working, I'm trying to figure out how I can get a couple of minutes of learning, right? And when I'm davening, I'm thinking about work. And when I'm learning, I'm somewhere. So in general, it's a problem of mindfulness and a problem of being present and whatever it is. So Rava was saying to his students, I'd rather you not come to the Beis Medrash during the planting season and the harvesting season. Be in the fields. Give that 100. Obviously, they're going to learn also the Nisan and Tishrei. But he's saying is give that 100%, because that way, if you give that 100%, I'm confident that the other months when you are with me, you'll give me 100%. Incredible Gemara. Amar Rabba Bar Chana, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Mishum Rabbi Yehuda Rabbi Eloi. So Rabbi Chana is saying Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Yehuda Bar Eloi. Bo'urei shelo kedaras harishonim daras achronim. So we'll say, see how the latter generations are not like the earlier generations. In general, we have a concept of niskatnu hadoros, that generally, like, right, the further we come away from Har Sinai, so the greater there is a spiritual decline. So you see the Gemara do this often, how you contrast the earlier generations with our generations. Here the Gemara says, see how different the earlier generations are from us. How so? So the Gemara says, Doros Harishonim Asu Torasan Keva Malachtan Arai. So the earlier generations, they made their Torah study Keva. Now Keva literally means like a fixed practice, and their Malacha, their work, was more like Arai. Arai means not fixed, right? Or not permanent or temporal. Now listen, what does it mean? What does it mean they made? So first I want to point out, they worked, right? We keep going back to this same idea. They worked. They did malacha. But what was different about the earlier generations? They had priorities. What were the priorities? Torah was first and work was second. I will say it's more than that. In B'derech Hashkafa, what it is, a person has to ask themselves, like, why do I work? Why do I work? So I will say what's interesting is a lot of times for people, their work becomes their identity, which if a person is doing meaningful work, it's very nice, but your work should never be your identity. For the simple reason why shouldn't your work be your identity? Because what happens if you can no longer do your work? You see people like this, who their entire persona is wrapped up in what they do for a living. And it may be very important. And then chas v'shalom, something happens, they lose the skill set, they're unable to refine, and suddenly again they're lost because there's no independent identity. So we'll say, so the earlier generations, they probably worked hard. When I say malachtan arai, people think that it means like they learned Torah most of the day and only worked for a couple of hours. It probably doesn't mean that. It probably means they worked however many hours they worked. But in terms of like a priority in life, why do I work? I work in order to learn. Why do I work? I work in order to go ahead and provide for a lifestyle of Yiddishkeit. So it's a question of priorities. The Torah was their keva, the Torah was the fixed piece, and the malacha, the work, was the, I don't know what the opposite of fixed piece is, non-fixed piece. Okay? Right, good. So Gemara says, however, and what happened? Zu v'zu and this kind of biyadin. Suppose something amazing happened. They were successful in their work and they were successful in their learning. See, when you have the right priorities in life, you could be successful in multiple things. On the flip side, but the later generations who made their work the primary focus of their lives, and ruchnios and spirituality in Torah was of secondary importance. Zu v'zu lonis kaima biyadin. Neither, they weren't really successful in either one. Now, I will say, now what it means is it doesn't mean you can't like pull off something, right? In other words, they made money, they learned Torah, they were fine, but they weren't really successful. Because I'll say what happens, success in life comes when you have the right set of priorities. So of course I have to work and I have to work hard and I want to be successful, but that's not the primary goal. The primary goal is Torah. The primary goal is HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The primary goal is Avodas Hashem. That's the primary goal. And the work is there to facilitate that. When I have the right priorities, that's when everything works out. See how the earlier generations are so different than the later generations. How so? So we'll say there's an interesting halacha. The halacha is that produce only becomes, we'll see this in just a moment, produce only becomes chayiv in meiser when you bring it through the entranceway of the home. That's when it becomes chayiv in meiser. So the earlier generations would dafka go out of their way to bring the produce through the gateway. Rashi says Traxamon is derech shari hachotzer v'abayis, the gateways, right? The opening, the gates of the home in the front yard. So the earlier generations would dafka bring in their produce through the front door. Why? Because they wanted to make themselves chayiv in meiser. They wanted to make themselves chayiv in meiser. They wanted to be chayiv in meiser. Doros hachronim machnisim perosem derech gagos, derech chatzeros, derech karfifos kedei lepatron. But later generations will say, what did they do? Later generations, unfortunately, would circumvent. You see, technically speaking, if you bring the produce into your house through a window, through a skylight, technically speaking, it's tax exempt. Right, it's tax exempt. So the later generations would dafka bring in their produce in this roundabout way in order not to trigger the obligation for meiser. It's incredible. Now, I just want to point this. So just if you think about it just a moment, are the latter generations doing something wrong? Are they doing something wrong? I don't know. It's hard to say they're doing something wrong. They are utilizing a legal loophole. So I will say, but the shaila is really what it. So what's the issue over here? So really, what it represents is, how do you view your obligations of Yiddishkeit? That's really what it comes down to. How do you look at your Yiddishkeit? Is your Yiddishkeit ultimately something that is a burden, something that is onerous, that it's a yoke, or is it something that's beautiful, pleasant, and incredible? So how can you tell which is which? It's very simple. If I'm looking for a way to get out of it, then it's clear that it's a yoke. It's clear, I said this over in one of the pre-Pesach shiurim. Rabbi Levi Yitzchak Kaberditchev, Zechuzia Genelina, has such a beautiful mashal. He says that there are two guys, Reuven and Shimon, and Reuven dealt in precious gems, and Shimon dealt in like metals, like ore metals. So they had both ordered merchandise to come in. So the problem is the post office or whatever mixed up the packages so that the metal went to Ruvain, the precious gem guy, right? And the metal, right, and the precious gems went to Shimon. So Ruvain goes outside, and Ruvain lifts up the package. And he says, "This is not my package. So his wife says to him, "How do you know it's not your package? You didn't even open it up." He says, "It's too heavy. My package is not heavy." So the Rebbe says something beautiful. In Yiddishkeit, if you feel that the package you're lifting up is too heavy, it's the wrong package. It's the wrong Yiddishkeit. You're doing something wrong. Because Yiddishkeit is precious gems. And if when you lift it up, when you take it, if you feel like, oh my gosh, this is ridiculous, it's backbreaking, it's too much, wrong package. You got the wrong package delivered to your house. There's something off with your Yiddishkeit, because Yiddishkeit is always beautiful, always magnificent, and always able to be carried. So that's beautiful over here. So you can see the fundamental difference over here is the earlier generations looked at the opportunity to tithe their produce as a zechus. And as such, there was no need to circumvent the law. Let's go in the front door. Later generations viewed it as something onerous. And as such, they tried whatever they could do in order to circumvent it. It's incredible. So the Gemara says, Don Rabbi Yanai, because Rabbi Yanai said, that literally untithed produce is not subject to meiser until it comes through the front door. Literally, until it sees the entrance way of them. It comes through the front door. Shnei Amar, bi'arti HaKodesh min habayis. Rabbi Yochanan Amar, afilu chatzer kol va'as Shnei Amar, va'achlu b'sharecha v'sadei. All right, this is some machlokes over here. Does the produce have to come through the front door? Or maybe it's just enough. If the produce is in the chatzar. Okay, either way, the point over here is that the earlier generations would go out of the way to obligate themselves in Meiser. The later generations would find a way to circumvent it. Truly highlights and bespeaks the relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu and Torah. Incredible. Chutz me'ayis. All right, so back to Berachos. So remember again, the Mishnah said that in general, when you eat fruit that comes from the tree, the halacha is you say the bracha, borei peri ha'etz, except for wine. On wine, you will say, Borei pri hagofen. So the Gemara says as follows: Maishna yayin. Why is wine different? Now I will say. Now here's what's interesting. I just want to point out. The Gemara seems to presuppose, like you would think to yourself, what's different? One is a grape and one is an extract from a grape. So it seems to be like the Gemara's initial assumption is that halacha l'maisa, something that comes from the fruit. Okay. Something that comes from the fruit ultimately, again, has the same status as fruit. That seems to be the Gemara's havamina. Again, we're going to talk about that because obviously that's not really how we paskin generally. But the Gemara says like this. Okay, so now wine. I would have thought wine is beri priya eitz. That's what I would have thought. Now the Mishnah tells me no, it is beri priya gafen. So the Gemara says, why is that? Ma'ishna yayin. So we say this. Well, maybe because wine changed for the better, right? It went from a grape to wine. Obviously, and everyone's going to agree that wine is a higher status or a higher form, so to speak, of the grape. So maybe since it changed into a higher status, therefore what? Therefore it gets a new bracha. Okay. Here's the problem. V'hari shemen d'ishtani le'iluya v'lo ishtani lebracha. Now, boss, and this is interesting, and that's why I said that it's an interesting havamina here. What about oil? Right, oil. On one hand, olive oil is of a higher level than the olive, yet the bracha is the same. Now we'll talk about that, about what bracha you make on olive oil, because it's not so pashut that why are you consuming just straight olive oil? So we'll discuss that in Mir Hashem. So the Gemara says, because look at olive oil, right? The oil is better, so to speak, than the olive. Yet the bracha on olive oil is ha'etz, just like the olive. To which the Gemara says, "Damar Rav Shmuel, the Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Shmuel, v'chin Amar Rav Yitzchak, Amar Rav Yochanan, shemen zayis mevarchan ala brei preitz." Right, on olive oil you make brei preitz. I'll say again, like I said, don't draw any halacha l'maisa. I'll tell you something interesting. You think to yourself, drinking olive oil. I remember there is a winery called the Ella Valley Winery. Right, it's right outside of Beit Shemesh. Actually, Ella Valley, Emek HaEla, is where David fought Goliath. So there's a winery there. So I remember a number of years ago, I went to this winery, and they asked me if I wanted to taste olive oil. So It was so interesting. I said, no. They said, yes, you do. It wasn't Israeli, right? Yeah, you do. He's very good. Right? So it's interesting. So the olives that they produce in this area are sweet. They're sweet olives. And you could actually drink the oil now what bracha we're going to get to. You actually drink the oil, and the oil itself is sweet. Okay, so we'll get to this. In any event, the Gemara is special bracha of Eretz Yisrael. So the Gemara says as follows. So the Gemara says, so again, olives, so the oil is better formed than the olive. Yet again, there's bracha on olive oil is still borei pri ha'etz. To which the Gemara says that's different. Amri hasam mishum delo efshar. That's because you have no choice. Why not? Heichin levarach. Because what bracha should you make on olive oil? Levarach borei pri hazayis. You can't make the bracha borei pri hazayis. Why not? Because that's redundant. Pera gufa zayis ikri. The fruit itself is called an olive, so that would be a redundant bracha. So the Gemara says, "I nevarech alei borei pri eitz hazayis." So why not make the bracha borei pri eitz hazayis? To which the Gemara says, "You're right. There must be a different reason why wine is treated differently." Therefore, it says, "Ela Amar Marzotra Chamra Zayin Mishcha Lo Zayin." Wine satiates, oil doesn't satiate. So now the Gemara is assuming over here that maybe one of the reasons why wine also gets its own bracha is because it has a food-like satiating quality. The Gemara says, "Mishcha lo zayin." Is that true? That oil doesn't satiate? So the Gemara says, "V'atzanan we learned hanodra min hamazon." So it's an interesting case over here. Let's say a person makes a neder not to get any benefit from mazon. Now, how would you translate mazon? We translate mazon often as food. But really in halacha, mazon, well, actually, let's see it inside. So the Gemara says, so hanodra min hamazon, mutar b'mayim u'b'melach. So if you make a neder not to get benefit from mazon, you can't eat anything. The only thing you're allowed to eat is water and salt. Va'avinon ba, mayim u'melach u'telo ikri mazon, ha kol mili ikri mazon. So it's only water and salt that are not called mazon, but every other item is called mazon. So what do you see from here? You see from here that halacha l'maisa, even olive oil satiates, right? Just like wine. To which the Gemara says, "Name it to Rav Shmuel." Maybe there should be a repetition of Rav Shmuel. The Amri ein mevarchin borei minei mizonos ela beheminim bilvad. Well, if that's the case, that everything besides wine and oil satiates, then guess what? The bracha on everything besides, water and salt. The bracha on everything besides water and salt should be what? Borei minei mizonos, because everything satiates. So the Gemara says, "Amrav Huna ba'omer kol hazan alai." Rather, I will say, what's the case? The case ultimately is where a person is making a neder, he's saying anything, kol hazan. Kol hazan means essentially anything which delivers some level of nutritional value. Anything that provides some level of nutritional value should be asur to me. So the Gemara says, now let's analyze this. Ilema mashchazayin, so alma mashchazayin. Therefore, what do you see from here? You see from here that Allah chalamayim, so oil provides some level of nutritional value as well. So we'll say if that's the case, so now let's analyze this. So for saying that wine is unique because ultimately it satiates, and that's why it gets its own bracha, so oil seems to conform to those same criteria as well, and therefore it should get its own bracha as well. Ella chamra soid umishcha lo soid. Here's the difference. Wine satiates, oil doesn't satiate. Bless you. Oil doesn't satiate, and therefore halacha l'maisa, that's why wine will get its own bracha. Satiates, good. So the Gemara says, v'chamra misad, is that true that wine satiates? Also, just one more line, then we'll have to stop. Chamra misad, v'ha rava havashasi chamra kamal yom de pischa, ki hechi dinigrere lalibe v'necha matzah tfei. V'necha matzah tfei tuva. I'm sorry, v'necha matzah tfei. But Rava used to drink wine all of Erev Pesach. Why? To increase his appetite. So you see from here, wine doesn't satisfy fakir, just the opposite. Wine makes you hungry. To which the Gemara says, no. Tuva garir, porta sa'id. A lot of wine makes you hungry. A little bit of wine seems to satiate. So the Gemara says, umi sa'id klal, but does wine really satiate at all? The haksiv, the yayin yisamach levav enosh, the lechem yivav enosh yisad. The pasuk says, wine will gladden the heart of man, and bread will satiate the individual. So the Gemara says, what do you see from here? Namohu desaid, chamra lo said. It's bread that satiates, not wine. To which the Gemara says, you're right. Ala chamra isbei tarti said u'misameach, nama misad said samuchi lo misameach. Rather, I'll say, what's unique about wine? Wine has both of these qualities. Number one, it satiates. Number two, it makes a person happy. Bread, as chashuv as bread is, bread will satiate, but bread doesn't contribute to any additional level of joy. Let's just end off. If that's the case, then we should bench on wine also. Bench on wine also. To which the Gemara says, Lo kaboy in shisu dasayu iluya. People don't really make a meal around wine. Since Berachos Hamazon is recited on a meal, people don't really set up a meal around wine. Therefore, there's no benching. So what happens if a person were to sit down and just eat a meal of wine? Would they bench afterwards? Amarle l'chishiyava elio v'yomar ihadya kviusa hashta miha batla daita eitza koladam. To which the Gemara answers, when Eliyahu Navi comes, he'll answer that question. But right now, no one does that. And therefore, even if you do establish a meal based on wine, halacha l'maisa, batla daita eitza koladam, which means just because you do it doesn't make it normal. These are good words to live by in general in life, right? Just because you do it doesn't make it normal. And therefore, halacha l'maisa, batla daita eitza koladam means your personal practices are really negated in the face of what we'll call normative public practice. So I will say, we'll stop here for tonight. We're not finished with wine, but it appears that based on the Gemara's understanding now, wine gets its own bracha for really three reasons. Number one, it's considered to be an elevated form of the grape. Number two, it satiates. And number three, it provides simcha. I will say, shkoyach. Join us for Chasidus Emertz Hashem in the base medrash, starting